Good morning, Class 7. As we continue the chapter, for a while misunderstood him, let us first revise what all we have learned in the last class. In the last class, we were talking about the great scientist, that is, Stephen Hawking. The narrator, Giant, recalls the story from 1963, and we have learned from him that they were colleagues. They worked together in the Royal Observatory, Greenwich, during summer vacations. And he was shocked to hear the news from the doctors that Stephen Hawking, whom he met 2 years before, will have only 2 years of life. And then he tells us that when they studied together, Stephen Hawking would take part in the games as other students, and he used to give speech, though his speech was unclear, and that they thought him to be like the English elite who would speak in a similar fashion as in those days when people speak in a different accent, they are considered to be special. So too, they thought that Stephen Hawking also had that accent, as they tell among themselves that this is how the Oxford students were. And when Stephen came to Cambridge after receiving his degree from Oxford in 1962, the narrator tells us that they used to meet daily, and they found that Stephen Hawking's speech is still the same. There is not a change, and that none of them knew that this would be the first symptom of his disability. So, the narrator, when he heard the news that he would live only for 2 years, he was shocked. So, students, we have learned up till here. Now, we shall begin with the next page, that is page 51. Now, let us read the text. Later, I got to know that he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a neuromuscular wasting disease, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. So, students, here the word amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. This is a disease, name of a disease, okay? A nervous system disease that weakens muscles and impacts physical function. So in this disease, nerve cells break down, which reduces functionality in the muscles that they supply. And the cause is unknown. So this type of disease happens very rare. Treatment can help them, but this condition can't be cured, and it requires a medical diagnosis and need to be tested in the lab. And this type of diseases can last for years or be a lifelong, like this great scientist Stephen Hawking. He had a lifelong amyotrophic. And here the narrator also tells us that this disease is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Now let's read. Over time, the disease reduced his bodily control to the flexing of his finger and voluntary eye movements. Rapid changes in his physical condition were visible after he joined Cambridge. He would at times stumble while walking. But Stephen completed the PhD thesis and started further research. He did not require much help from his guide. So, here in these lines, the narrator tells us that uh, after joining Cambridge, they saw a rapid change in the body of Stephen Hawking. They saw that the disease reduced his bodily control, like moving of his fingers and his eye movements. So they saw the changes that is going on in his bodies. And then he also tells us that uh, Stephen Hawking would stumble while walking. That means he would lose his balance. But even after all these disabilities, Stephen Hawking completed the PhD thesis, and then he started a further research, and he did not take much help from his guide, his teachers, or the professors. During 1966 to 67, Stephen solved a difficult question regarding Einstein's theory of relativity. This was the time when his illness snatched away his ability to use his hands for writing. So he started doing calculations in his mind instead. His colleagues would listen to his unclear speech and note down the equations Stephen dictated. It wasn't surprising that every equation was perfect. And so, students, here the narrator tells us that Stephen Hawking also solved a difficult question regarding the Einstein's theory of relativity. And while he was solving this, his illness forcefully took away his ability. That is, he lose the ability to write. So he started calculating things in his mind. And he also tells us that his colleagues would write whatever he dictated. Though his body failed him, Stephen used his brain and successfully continued his research. Between 1969 and 1973, Stephen presented an important theory on black holes. In 1974, he discovered that black holes could emit radiation, which was a surprising find. This was then called the Hawking effect. Here, the word black hole means an area in space that nothing, not even light, can escape from because gravity is so strong there. And then the word radiation means heat, energy, etc., that is sent out in the form of rays. Here, the narrator tells us that though Stephen was physically weak, though he had a disability in his body, he never gave up but used his brain, and he successfully continued his research. And then in the year 1969 and 1973, he presented an important theory on black holes. And then later on, he also discovered that black holes could emit radiation. This means that the energy can be sent out in the form of rays into the black holes. And so this was called the Hawking effect. Stephen's success was powered as much by his determination as his first wife, who gave him immense support. So here the word powered by means strongly supported. So this line tells us that his wife also supported him strongly. In 1964 to 65, Stephen became friends with Jane Wilde and later they got married. Wasn't her decision to accept Stephen's disability and marry him as equally courageous one? They have two healthy children, a daughter and a son. So, from this line, we come to know that though Stephen Hawking had a disability, Jane Wilde accepted her as her husband, and they had two healthy children, a daughter and a son. When he lost his speech, Stephen started using a voice processor. During this time, he wrote A Brief History of Time. He proved wrong the doctors who had said that he had only 2 years to live. Undeterred by his disability, Stephen made a path-breaking contributions in fundamental science. He showed how his disability never came in the way and continued to contribute to science until his brain was functional. So here the word voice processor means the computerized handling of voice, which includes voice store and forward, voice response, voice recognition, and text-to-speech technologies. So, Stephen Hawking used this voice processor and he proved the doctors to be wrong, that he will be living only for 2 years, but he lived for a long time. And he showed the world that his disability did not affect in his way. And he continued to contribute to science until his brain was functional. Here the word undeterred by means if somebody is undeterred by something, they do not allow it to stop them from doing something. This means his disability did not stop him from doing his work. So here we come to an end of the chapter, and students, remember Stephen Hawking did not pass after 2 years, but he passed away on 14 March 2018.